Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to the Flower Lounge. This week is going to be amazing. We are going to talk about all things planetary, cosmic, stars, transformation, and beyond. I am really excited to have a dear friend of mine on the podcast today, and that is Kristina Wingeier. She is a lunar-loving, sun-worshipping, sky-watching astrologer, keeping time with the moon and the tide in Pismo Beach, California. Her body of work is anchored in the divine feminine, the exploration of cosmic time, and the natural rhythms of lunar and seasonal living. Multi-perceptual listening allows her to give voice to unseen realms, offering guidance and support in navigating the ebbs and flows of life. Things that bring Kristina joy are the ocean, birdsong, the moon, plants, travel, books, music, silence, Kundalini yoga, embodiment practices, dancing, walking in nature, photography, and getting creative in the kitchen. Thank you so much for being here, Kristina.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be chatting with you today.
I just have to throw out there that if you're on Instagram, you have to go check out Kristina's profile. It's Kristina Wingeier, her name. And I'm so excited every time I see your name pop up on the Insta stories up on top, because every day is so beautiful. I mean, you must take a walk in nature every day. And there's those, I just those sea anemones are to die for, those jade colored sea creatures. Gorgeous. And every day you're on the beach, sunsets, flowers, right?
It's right outside the door. I mean, I'm lucky enough to be in a place now where that is really literally just I go outside my door. I mean, I can see the ocean from my window, and that hasn't always been that way. But I always, even when I lived in Richmond and it was, a little neighborhood with trash all over the place, I would walk out and look at connect with nature and look at flowers and take pictures. So.
Oh yeah. Speaking of flowers, since you're a flower girl, we usually do this exercise at the beginning with everybody where we have you close your eyes and go back to a time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants or trees. And you just think about what you were doing and who you were with and what might be your favorite flower or botanical from that time. And if you could describe its personality in 3 words, think about what 3 words you would use.
All right. So I went back to a time when I'm young and in a garden in my childhood home in Ohio. And I used to love to just spend time in the grass, and I used to like to look for toads, toad hunting, just to hang out with them. And so my mom grew peonies, and I always loved the peonies because there were so many layers to them, and they were so luscious and just open, and a lot of activity around them in their opening. And I was just like a little nature girl from the very beginning. So peonies and toad tracking, in my mom's garden in Ohio. And peonies are open and multi-layered.
That's for sure.
And there's a softness. There's like a softness to peonies that is very welcoming to me.
So how we would interpret that is typically your childhood favorite flower, and how you describe it is how you bring your gifts into the world and your essence. So I would say that you bring your gifts in a very open, multi-layered, soft, welcoming, and luscious way.
Thank you.
It sounds just like you.
The softness is not always true, but it is underneath the prickliness when the prickliness does arise. The prickly protection.
Oh, yes. So going back to the oceans, you have the ocean right next to you.
I do.
And you are one of the people that I know who is the most in tune and in touch with the moon and And, I think the moon and the tides and, the way that the moon affects the tides of the ocean, like how does something like that move such great bodies of water? And, just wanted to ask you about, anything you had to offer us regarding moon magic and the ocean or what it means to you.
Yeah. I've always known that the moon affects the tides, but I didn't really know what that meant until I moved here and started to witness what that actually looks like. Because I do go to the ocean every day. I look at the tides, I look at the water. And what happens is, I can't explain all the science behind it, but I can tell you about new and full moons.
Right.
Because when the moon is new, the moon is sandwiched in between the earth and the sun. And so there's this very strong gravitational pull that is also pulling on the bodies of the earth. And same when the moon is full, it's on the earth is in between the sun and the moon. So they're lined up. And at those times, the tides, which are connected to the moon, are very extreme. So they're really high and really low. And those low tides are when I like to go out and look for the anemones, actually, because when the tide is super low, you can walk around and see all the tide pools and everything that is revealed. So,
wow.
And then just really think about us being full of water, our bodies, and how it's so important to stay hydrated around the new and the full moons, especially, all the time, but how it just pulls up emotions, both the new and the full moon, not just the full moon, but now that I live by the ocean, I actually don't sleep well around the new moon either. Like I feel it, I can hear the tides in the back of the house, which is not, the waves crashing, which is pretty unusual. It's so loud and it's very powerful and it really stirs us.
And you're saying to stay hydrated because of the heightened emotionality around it, and that would provide more stability?
I think that's absolutely true. And I'm thinking just that if the moon and the earth and the sun are creating that kind of movement in the waters of the earth, we are earth. Like our bodies are earth and we have those waters inside of us. And so it's pulling things out, especially the full moon really pulls stuff up and out, and it's easy to be dehydrated.
I love how you said you go walking, you like to walk on the new moon, the full moon, when the tide is really low, and then the tide pools will reveal all of these things. So is it safe to say then that astrologically that during these times things are revealed about ourselves to ourselves?
I would say so.
About the world to ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. Especially full moon. There's so much light, right? The full moon is the brightest that the moon can be, reflecting all of this light of the sun. And so things are really revealed. And that's where lunacy and all the crazy things that happen around the full moon, because we see it all. It's very intense to look at sometimes. And same in the new moon, although it's more of an instinctual knowing because it's dark and there is no light. But you can see in the dark if you tune in, and there's a lot of richness in the darkness.
Yeah, talk about the new moon. I think so often we hear, more about the full moon. What's the magic of the new moon? And I know certain people are like, we're very rote, like full moons are for ending and new moons are for beginning and planting seeds, and, very rigid in how they see. You're more of a flexible person, multi-layered, angled approach.
Yeah.
Tell us about the new moon, and also just, in general, how you weave ritual into your life around the moon.
Sure. So I definitely have always been resistant to being told how to experience anything, and that includes the moon. That said, there is a certain energetic quality to every phase of the moon and the lunar cycle. And the new moon is when the sun and the moon and the earth are all lined up, and the sun and the moon are in the same degree of the zodiac. And so it's beginning a lunar cycle. So there is a moment in time when that happens.
Okay.
However, in a similar way that kind of the day before, the day of, and the day after the full moon feels like a full moon,
right?
Same with the new moon. So the day before the new moon, the day of the new moon, and the day after is very liminal and very much, to me, about rejuvenation and retreating and going within. And we get to decide when it begins, like when you want to plant the seeds. I mean, if you want to be on the, the timing and work really specifically, I mean, go for it. That's beautiful. A lot of serious ritual magic making people do that to, I'm sure, great success. In some cultures, the moon is new when you can see a sliver of crescent moon in the sky, because that's when you can see the new moon. You can't see the moon when the moon is new because she travels with the sun, unless it's an eclipse, and then she covers the sun, right? So
yeah, I noticed that, like, in observing. So at my house, we have a bunch of huge jasmine, night blooming jasmine bushes. It's my favorite flower. I know. It's so good. It's so good. And so they bloom at night. And what I noticed is that they just flourish and pop out like crazy on both full moon and new moon. So, you might think like, oh, they just flourish in full moon, but actually they're going nuts at new moon as well.
That's so cool. I had no idea. I mean, it's got to be with that gravitational pull, because it's the same pull. Things are just lined up in different ways, right?
Right.
I mean, that just speaks to the power of whatever you're doing, whether you're setting intentions, like you're setting intentions, whether you're setting intentions or not. What you're thinking, what your heart is beating, what you're feeling into, you're setting an intention. So it can be a very conscious thing, like, oh, it's a new moon in Capricorn, and I want to set an intention that has to do with Capricorn and the energy of this sign. But even if you don't know anything,
right,
like, the moon is affecting you. Your body is of the earth. It's receiving those vibrations, and you're setting an intention with whatever you're doing in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so interesting and fascinating how astrology has become so popular in our culture. And I think, 10 years ago, it was very different than today. Now it's like everybody you meet knows their sign, their rising, their moon, their, next it'll be like, where's Pluto? Where's Uranus? Where's, in your chart, like everyone.
Astrology jokes. Yes.
I know. They never get old. But so tell me, what do you see? You're a professional astrologer. How do you, see the balance between sort of like the easy to understand pop culture, horoscope type astrology, quick bite, and, the actual like pulling someone's natal chart based on where they were born and what time, and the more like science and mathematics of it?
So, I mean, pop astrology, I mean, I think it's the internet that has made astrology really, really boom. I mean, astrology's gone through a lot of things in its history, and really has been in the Western culture pretty alive and well for the 20th century, and especially like the New Age movement, and then to the 80s and 90s and things like that. But the internet's really made everything so accessible, and so people are looking for guidance. And so astrology gives us that, because it's the planets and the luminaries have always given humans guidance, or we've looked to the sky for guidance before there was a horoscope, right? With the stars.
Even just for wayfinding or physics or math, or right?
Exactly. I mean, I believe it was Polynesian culture moving to Hawaii and like navigating by star maps, to get to those islands from those islands. I think that's what I've read. So it's like we have it so hardwired in us to connect, and the planets are messengers of the gods. That's what they have been doing for many cultures around astrology. And
the question is like, where do you find the value between sort of like the cheap and easy pop culture astrology versus like pulling someone's natal chart based on actual numbers and locations? And it's more scientific approach.
So cheap and easy is just that. It's cheap and easy. And with cheap and easy, it's like fast food. Like maybe it tastes good going down, and it's really fun. I don't know. I don't eat fast food, but it's really, people can easily access it, and doesn't cost too much money. Doesn't take any time to prepare the meal. Right. And people want to know about ourselves. We're storytelling people, and the signs, and there's all this archetypal imagery woven in, and mythology and all that stuff. And so it's like, understanding your place in your story and your narrative. And I think there's something really valuable in that in general with astrology, but with pop astrology, it's super definitive, and it's also kind of going to be shallow by nature, and also very stereotypical and limited. And everything has light and shadow. There's so many nuances. There's different schools of approach to things, and really understanding your natal chart, like having, somebody pull it all together for you and give you this interpretation of what these energies, these elements and modalities and myths, how they might be playing out in your life and how you might be interacting with them, is really profound. And it's actually a very sacred conversation and connection. And anybody that's going to be very trite or very, again, stereotypic, it's not going to be of service to somebody. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, it does. It does. Let's talk about interpretation. So, sure. I mean, I think probably we could get our natal charts read by 5 different astrologers and get a similar picture, but slightly, like you said, nuanced, different based on difference of schools. Yeah, just talk about the role of interpretation in astrology, as well as, because I think one of the dangers of astrology is someone might tell us something, we take it very much to heart, and it's either, painful or limiting in some way, or we make decisions based on the information versus just sort of like being open to many different types of interpretation. What's the role in terms of like responsibility of an astrologer and someone receiving information to sort of be open to a plethora of interpretations? Like, what's the role of interpretation in astrology?
It's huge, because every astrologer is going to bring their bias into their reading, not just the school or the way they've studied, but they're going to be, there's a filter. We share from our filter unless we do a lot of work to get outside of our filter and to be able to share from a clearer space. Not all astrologers are good counselors. And I think that being able to have counseling skills and have respect for how words land with people and how powerful words are. If you're choosing an astrologer to work with, you want to work with somebody who you feel comfortable with and who you feel like you can talk to and whose language is respectful, not like skirting the dark stuff, because there is hard stuff in life and in astrology, but there's a way to talk about harder, challenging things that is neither spiritual bypassing nor, you're doomed, it's like, how can you work with the energy? It's about transformation, really, especially with the transits affecting the natal chart. That's where we're really feeling stuff, is what's being activated in the moment and old patterns. The natal chart reflects patterns of energy. And so there's kind of this natal wiring that we all have, and how does that work, and how has it worked for you, and how is the current astrology triggering it all? So,
and you can see in someone's chart sort of like if they were to go backwards versus if they were to push forward more towards their full potential, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see where people are likely to get tripped up. Like there's certain things that are just hard, like certain planetary conjunctions and certain things affecting certain parts of the chart that are very challenging. I mean, Pluto transits are no joke. They melt you down, you fall apart. It's like breaking down, but there's a breakthrough, there's a regeneration, there's a rebirth, but there's death, and death is not easy. So.
And Pluto transits happen for all of us.
Oh yeah. But
at different times.
Yeah. I mean, all the planets are always moving and always affecting our chart, but it's not all of us are going to have Pluto transits in our lifetime that are going to impact like personal planets, which Pluto transiting your sun is going to be an intense transit. And Pluto moves really slowly. So the transits last for years.
Roto-rooting for years.
Total roto-rooting for years. And that's hard. That's hard. And you don't want to bypass that, right? It's going to be fine, but you don't want to, you don't have to be stuck in it. There's a way to work with anything that we're experiencing. And so
I love that attitude, because I think sometimes when we hear things, we hear them as very, like a prediction, like it's fixed, like it's stuck, for example, really silly example, like I can't buy electronics during Mercury retrograde. Okay, we'll do our best, right? We'll do our best.
Do our best.
but if, if our parents bought a new car during Mercury retrograde, are we going to be like, if you could just like talk about not getting too rigid, like how do we cultivate our own relationships with Mother Nature and the cosmos in a way that allows us to tune in and know what's right for us and when we should heed sort of a framework of astrology?
Totally. Well, I really think that we always know what's right for us, even if we don't know we know. So I would, no matter what an astrologer tells you or what you read or what you hear, you have to learn how to listen and trust what you're experiencing and cultivate. I mean, walk in nature, be with nature, cultivate a relationship to the natural world. Look at the moon, look at the stars if you can, look at the planets. You can see a lot of the planets in the sky, and there's, really cool website. I think it's maybe earthsky.org. I don't remember, but I mean, they send out information every day on an email. These are the planets you can see, and this is how you can see them. So take the time to connect, right? And then, I mean, there are certain patterns of energy, and there is a way that astrology can be predictive of things, kind of fascinating, but it's not, we also have free will. And that's a huge part of it. And if you have to buy a new phone because you dropped your phone in the toilet during Mercury retrograde, it's better to be able to communicate with people than to be like, oh, I can't buy a new phone because it's Mercury retrograde, right?
Right.
And if Mercury retrograde, if you're somebody who has you really have a hard time in Mercury retrogrades, talk to an astrologer and figure out like how it works, and how actually the beginning and the end are worse than the middle, and look how it affects your chart and get some information and make it more specific to your experience rather than just buying into the fear of things not going fast enough.
Mm-hmm. So what, I know you said that you pulled the chart for this day and time that we were going to be recording. I wondered if there was any insights in there that you wanted to share, or what led to that decision-making process.
Well, I looked at the calendar before. I pulled the chart before the episode. I actually didn't pull it until we started, like right before we started talking. I picked this day specifically because I've always kind of looked at the lunar cycle, and I know my relationship to lunar energy. And so I know when I'm likely to be feeling more in flow and feeling like sharing, and when I'm going to be not feeling that way. And so I picked today because the moon is a crescent and there's light coming from the newness. And it's Friday, which is the day for Venus. And I have Venus, a strong Venus in my chart. So I was like, Venus, and we can connect and be in this beautiful relationship. And also there were just not a lot of hard aspects today. Like no planets were beating each other up or anything. And so it seemed like it would be a good time to talk. And then, so that's how I picked the date. And then I looked at the chart because I cast a chart for the time, and I just looked at the pattern of energy, but I then put it on the outside of my natal chart because I wanted to see what parts of my chart were being activated and lit up by this call and by the time of this call. And so I noticed a few cool things. I noticed that the moon, which has just moved into Pisces, was crossing over my natal moon at the time of this call. I'm a natal moon in Pisces. And I noticed that for where I live, it was a Gemini rising chart, and I'm a Gemini. And so the rising sign is going to cross over my sun, which is pretty cool. So both luminaries in my chart are being kind of activated and lit up, my solar and lunar nature. So I thought that was kind of cool. Just looking at the chart real quickly.
That's really cool. Yeah. And I should share with the listeners too that we worked with Kristina, and we are actively working with Kristina in the business of LOTUSWEI to really look at, what are the times and the activities to do during certain times, just as a sort of like rough framework for each of the team members involved. You actually pulled a natal chart for every person on the team.
That was fun.
Yeah. Maybe you could speak to the benefits of using astrology in business.
Definitely. Well, something I'm really kind of fascinated by, I want to learn more about is financial astrology. There's astrologers that work with the stock market, which I think is pretty cool because that's business in a big way, right? But understanding the chart of the business itself, right? So you can cast a chart for a business based on, you can decide when you want that chart to be born. Like, was it when you filed paperwork, or was it when you opened your store or put your website online or whatever, right? You get to choose that moment. And understanding the flow of that, and then looking at everybody's natal chart and kind of where it fits into the business, is a way to understand the employees' roles within the company in a more holistic way. You can work with cycles of energy with the planets, the current transits, to know when are good times to launch projects and things like that. So it's like, what's happening in the sky and how is it activating the chart of the company? And then working with lunar energy is always a good idea, because there, as I said, there just is this kind of ebb and flow, wax and wane, build and release. And so, that's a pretty easy flow of energy to work with and do certain things around certain times of the lunar cycle, because it just will flow more easily when you do.
Mm-hmm. And I know we have a lot of eclipses coming up, both lunar and solar. What's the story about eclipses? Why are they so magical and kind of surprising and unexpected? And what's the difference between a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse?
Well, eclipses are, you know how I said at the new and the full moon that the moon and the sun and the earth are all lined up?
Mm-hmm.
So that happens every month at a new and a full moon. But an eclipse that eclipse will happen when that occurrence occurs at a specific point in the sky called a lunar node. And that's a place where the moon's orbit and the ecliptic, which is this imaginary line that the sun travels, intersect. And so that's why eclipses can only happen twice a year, when the sun is near one of the north or the south node. They were surprising because people didn't understand what was happening. If you experienced a solar eclipse like we experienced last August as a primitive person, you would be like, what happened? Where's the light going? Right? So they're surprising because they didn't understand them for a long time. And then, of course, astrologer priest types would then understand them and then hold that over, use that as a tool of manipulation, probably, which is kind of sucks, but it's probably true. And eclipses themselves, because the lights in the sky, a solar eclipse is always on a new moon, and that's when everything's lined up that the moon covers the sun, and at a particular place on the planet, then that you'll be able to see that occurrence. So solar eclipses are not visible everywhere, only in certain parts of the planet. Okay. And a lunar eclipse is when the moon is in the Earth's shadow on a full moon. And if you have the ability to see the full moon in the sky, then you'll see a full moon no matter where, a lunar eclipse, no matter where you are. And eclipses are about working with light and shadow and things that are hidden and revealed. And that's, eclipse season's funny. Funny things happen. Do you remember last year? I didn't watch it, but I read it in the news at the Oscars. Somebody announced the wrong best film. It was an eclipse. And they announced the best film and people started coming up stage to get the Oscar. And it was like, wait, that's the wrong one. It's actually this movie.
Oops.
Yeah. So like just funny little things happen in eclipses for sure. Huh. Unexpected. We got this house on an eclipse.
So it can be either really tough or really beautiful.
It's like life. It's like, yeah, I mean, and it's going to affect everybody's chart differently. Like if the eclipses are happening in a place in your chart that's particularly impacted, then you might really feel those eclipses more than somebody else. And they're portals. Eclipse season is a very liminal time, and especially the time in between the eclipses, it's like a birth canal. It's like a portal of energy, and things can get very pressurized and people act a little funny sometimes, but stay grounded.
In between the eclipses.
Because it's this like yeah, it's in between, and it's in between new and full moon, and these eclipses are happening and unexpected things are happening. It's not normal, it's not everyday occurrence, and it can feel very pressurized, and people can have a hard time if they're being hit by the eclipse in their chart particularly well.
So do you mean, for example, January 31st full moon lunar eclipse and the 15th of February solar eclipse new moon? So like in that window of time,
Yes.
those 2 weeks can be pressurized?
Absolutely. It's like a little birth canal. And this is a blue moon. So it's the second blue moon in January. And it's a very rare occurrence to have a blue moon total lunar eclipse. It's not your everyday kind of thing, which is pretty cool. And then we're also having a blue moon month in March. We'll have 2 full moons in March. So we're having 2 blue moon months this year. Blue moon didn't used to mean what it means now. It used to mean the fourth full moon in a season, I believe. And now it means the second blue moon in a month. I mean, the second full moon in a month. So, but it's pretty interesting times. So,
and what do you see? I mean, this might be, tell me if this is too broad of a question, but do you see any trends for the year 2018 that may be different than last year? And I know this is very general, and it's probably easier to get specific into somebody's chart than just generalized, but are the planets lining up in a certain way for 2018 in a way that's and somehow unique, or are there insights around it?
Well, yeah, there's actually some big things. Like, so Saturn, which spends about 3 years in a sign, just around solstice moved into Capricorn, its home sign. So that's a big shift in energy right there that we're all acclimating to, and Saturn will be in Capricorn until 2020. Uranus, actually, the butt of many an astrology joke, has a 7-year time period in a sign, and will be changing signs in May into Taurus from Aries. So that's going to be a huge shift of energy. So both these planetary shifts are into Earth. So both are from fire to earth. Saturn went from Sag to Capricorn, so that's earthed energy. And then Uranus is moving from Aries to Taurus, earthed energy. So the earth itself and issues around the earth and the health of our planet, I would think, and would be quite activated. We're going to also have, in addition to our usual 3 Mercury retrogrades, sometimes we have 4, Mars and Venus will both be retrograde this year as well. So those don't happen every year, and to have them both happening in the same year is going to be, those are personal planets. So we're going to be feeling those quite a bit. And Jupiter, of course, is moving through Scorpio, moved in last October, and will be in Scorpio most of this year. So continuing expanding into the depths and the collective subconscious and closet full of skeletons that, is happening, especially around, I think, with the whole Me Too movement and things like that nature, and women's rights. And that's all really being triggered and activated.
And what does that mean when Mars and Venus go into retrograde?
What does it mean looking at the planet, or like, what does it feel like?
How does it feel?
Oh,
what happens to us?
So Venus retrograde, it can definitely, it affects how we relate to people and relationships and love. So maybe an old lover will come up out of the ethers, and maybe there'll be some kind of crazy connection, but then it won't really pan out. I don't, something, it's around love and relationship. And Mars is how we take action. So things may stall out on a project, and it may feel like you're getting nowhere, but truly, like, retrogrades are periods of review. And an astrologer that I love, I actually don't listen to many astrologers, but an astrologer that I love talks about the planets being in meditation during retrogrades, and it's covering the territory they've already been across. So that's in your chart, you're reviewing stuff and kind of looking at it again, then you go back over it again. So there's this back and forth, I thought I finished this, oh my God, I'm here again, kind of thing. And then you integrate something, you move forward. And so,
what are some of the planets that most people haven't? I mean, most people have heard of Jupiter and Saturn. And what are some of the more sort of interesting and unique influences in our charts that people may not have heard of, like Chiron, or, what are some of those influences that you find personally interesting?
Well, I definitely think Chiron is interesting. Chiron is, what do they call him now? asteroid kind of planet, kind of does his own thing. About the wounded healer, that's the mythology. It's the whole asteroid belt is actually something that has been integrated into astrology just for a little while. So it's new. And if you think about asteroids being smaller, they don't have as much gravitational pull, so they don't influence things as much. But we also they are also full of really interesting mythology, especially some of the asteroid goddesses. So I actually do work with the asteroid goddesses quite a bit and look at them in the chart. And in fact, there's some really interesting aspects with them for this lunar eclipse coming up. So
tell us. What are the goddesses' names, and what influence do they have, and what's happening?
Let me just look at the chart exactly one quick, because I have been writing about it. But so let me just think if I can remember exactly. On the spot, Johnny on the spot. Okay, so Ceres, the Great Mother, is actually a dwarf planet, was in the asteroid belt. And her Roman name is Ceres, and she, in Greek mythology, is Demeter. So we have the story of Demeter and Persephone. We all know that story. Most of us know that story. Demeter, Ceres, is about nourishment, and the Great Mother herself in cycles of loss and grief and betrayal, with that whole story with how she lost her daughter on the North Node at the time of the eclipse, where the moon will be making a conjunction with her. So really bringing up from the subconscious all these feelings around our relationship to mothering, to our bodies, to nourishment, to the divine feminine, to the earth, the body of the earth. All of that will be activated. And being on the North Node, this is where we need to heal and move forward as a collective. The North Node is in Leo, so we need to get into the heart with this energy and really be doing a lot of heart healing. Okay. And then on the South Node, where the sun will be during this lunar eclipse, we will have an asteroid goddess called Juno, which is often called the goddess of marriage, but really is about right relationships and equality in relationships. Venus will also be very close to the node during the eclipse. And so these ideas of beauty and femininity, all in the South Node in Aquarius, we're being invited to really let go of old mental constructs around relationships, around beauty, around femininity. And we're just kind of doing this like restructuring around the divine feminine and the female voice in the culture, I think, right now in a really big way. And the eclipse is going to be bringing stuff up from the subconscious for the collective as well as each individual, depending on where all that's happening in the chart.
Mm-hmm. And bookending that. So if that were the beginning and the new moon solar eclipse that's coming up, is there anything you could say about the solar eclipse on the 15th of February?
It's a partial eclipse. It's not super potent as far as eclipses go. It will be in Aquarius. I haven't actually looked at the chart too much yet. I've been more like, because I'm teaching a class right now, and so I'm creating a presentation for the lunar eclipse, and so that's been more in my mind. But it will be the solar eclipse. It will be in Aquarius, and it's Aquarius energy is always an invitation to really consider the collective. And we're in the age of Aquarius, which is a whole another thing that it's the precession of the equinoxes, and we're shifting ages and this whole new way of repatterning how we communicate in the collective, and how we share our gifts from the heart in a collective way, I think is going to be important. I haven't looked at that chart. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So really, over the next few months, looking at themes of love, it sounds like.
Well, we're always looking at themes of love. We're human. Our hearts, right? It's like the strongest electrical frequency comes from our heart. Our hearts, we all want to be loved and feel love, and we all, to some degree close our hearts because we're so scared and hurt, and it's that opening and closing, and kind of like the moon, coming in, protection, and then opening up again. So love is always in the air, but issues around the earth, and the land and finances, they say as well, the Saturn and Capricorn and Taurus, Uranus moving into Taurus. So yeah.
And tell us about the class that you're giving.
It's so awesome. I am teaching a 15-month program that's an Astro Wisdom school called Vibrate the Cosmos. And I am teaching my students how to really embody their natal charts and how to really understand all the basic language of astrology in a very lunar way, where we're just kind of using the lunar cycle and each lunar cycle and what's happening, where the new moon is and where the full moon is and what the moon's doing, overlaid onto the natal chart, and learning about the pieces of the natal chart and the components along the way, depending on like what's happening with the lunar cycle. So it's pretty fun.
Wow. That sounds amazing.
I'm loving it. I love my students. It's just started and it's so exciting to me. It's 15 months. It kind of freaked me out to even offer something that long. It's really a lot of time, but I'm really excited to be doing it, and I'm dedicated to it. And it's steady pace with like nice little drips, not too overwhelming, because it's a long time.
I think you already closed your doors, but if somebody heard this podcast and wanted to sneak in somehow,
could they contact me?
They could reach out to you. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then in terms of what you offer, what kind of appointments do you do with people? Natal chart, business astrology?
Yeah, business astrology is not on my website, but if somebody was interested, they could definitely reach out. Natal chart reading. I'm an intuitive astrologer. I'm studied, but I'm very intuitive person. And so that's what it's called, intuitive astrology sessions. I also do astro tarot readings where I combine the tarot with the chart, and that's really fun. So those are smaller chunks of time. We don't go over the entire natal chart. We kind of deal with what's happening in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I teach. And I'm doing some lunar cycle coaching as well, where working with clients for 3 months chunks of time, meeting on around every phase of the moon and just doing this sustained connection. And people want to change patterns or start a project or really create something. It takes a while to get things moving, and you learn a lot about yourself when you work in longer chunks of time and trimesters.
And so how has astrology changed your life is the first question. And how do you, because we loved on this podcast to feature people who are making a living doing the things that are, kind of out there. Mm-hmm. So how did astrology come into your life and change it? And what's it like to be able to make a living doing astrology? It's so cool.
Astrology came in my life when I was a teenager, and I've just always been curious about it and always kind of like studied astrology on the side and started reading charts for people. I don't know, like just friends, friends and family. 5-6 years ago, finally just got an app on my phone, and everybody better watch out. And I actually had a dream in 2016 that kind of propelled me into stepping into saying I'm an astrologer and I'll read charts for clients and things like that. I first started integrating it into my counseling work just as a framework for me to look at. But I had a dream that I was in space, swimming like space was an ocean. Wow. And among the stars. And I had a basket with me, and I had somebody was with me, but I couldn't see who it was. And I was swimming with them from star to star, and certain stars I would put into my basket. And it was just this really expansive, like ethereal, awesome dream. And when I woke up, I was like, oh yeah, I'm an astrologer, and I can help people. I can help guide people, right? And I can help translate this language in a way that's useful. And so I just started kind of doing it after that point. And, I'm so grateful to be able to do what I love and have that be my profession. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to love and contribute from a place of like deep passion and connection. For me, it's something that it's so cool. It's just patterns of energy. It's mythology. It's the natural world. It's such a beautiful conversation to be tuning into, really, within yourself. I mean, the cosmos is inside of you, and get to figure that out and tune into all these different parts of yourself and tune into the cosmos and the bigger picture in a really cool way with astrology.
So you, having looked at many, many people's charts, have you ever seen like any chart that looks like it's like another, or are they all just like completely and totally different?
Well, definitely twins would be pretty similar, depending on how many minutes apart they were born. That would change their rising sign, maybe. So it's really what creates the uniqueness of the chart, because if a person's born at a certain day at a certain time all around the world, that people, let's say right now, what time is it? It's 2:04 on the 19th. Let's say there's 10 people born at this time at different places of the world. So they've all got the moon in a certain degree in their chart, but it's really where they live that it creates the rising sign. And that kind of locks in the houses, and then where all those planets are. So people born at the same time, the same year, in a similar time are going to have similar charts, but mostly they're pretty wildly unique.
And have you looked at the type of astrology where you can locate different, I can't remember what it's called, but where you can locate different places around the world and where might be activating certain sectors of your chart? So like, for example, this city may be really good for creativity for you, or this city is good for business or relaxation. Have you
I have looked at that. I'm not fluent in that at all. I've looked at it for myself, and it's kind of, the astrocartography. Yeah. It's cool. It's interesting. I've looked at it just because I'm curious about those kinds of things for myself, but I haven't really looked at it for clients. Yeah.
And what would you say that, what would be the one thing that you would recommend? For astrology has become so trendy. It's really amazing to me that, so many of the people I meet are like, or interview for coming to work with LOTUSWEI, I will always ask people, what's your sign? And I'm always amazed at, how quickly people will say, and my rising and my moon.
Really?
Like, oh yeah, it's shocking. It's become common knowledge now. And I wonder, like, what's the next step? Like, what's the next, okay, now first we had our sun, now we have sun, rising, moon. What's the next thing that you think would be the most interesting to people to know about themselves if they could get their hands on their chart?
I think it would be interesting to know where all the planets, what houses they're in, because that's really specific to you. So what parts of your life does your sun shine in? What house does your sun shine in? What part of your life does your moon hang out in? What part of your life does Mars do its thing? So I think that is the next level. And then house systems can get a little confusing because there's many different house systems. And so that can be confusing for people sometimes. If you go to two different astrologers and they use two different house systems, you're like, but wait, I thought this was all in my fifth house and it's in my sixth house. So, but I think that's really where you get to personalize it, is understand which areas of your life, for me, for example, my son is in my 12th house, and that's a house it's an interesting house, but it's a house that is about meditation and kind of getting away from it all and dissolving. It's that last house of the zodiac. So it's where it's kind of like a cosmic soup in there, and it can get kind of confusing. And I definitely, the way my identity is I don't like to fix my identity. Like, I'm very fluid in how I think about myself, and I need time away, and I need downtime, and I need to have quiet time. And, and it's not like your average Gemini. Like, I am a Gemini. I can be very chatty, but I'm not extroverted all the time. So that's going to really help you understand how you embody each of those planets and luminaries, is what part of your charts do these things occur in. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like a practice and almost like feeling understood, because you can look at where the things line up in your chart and like, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, that's totally how I feel. Oh, is that why I do that thing? Oh, is that why this relationship with somebody gets me going this way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then do you find once people can sort of look into the mirror of a natal chart, they can have more self-compassion?
I would hope so. I mean, if you're working with the right astrologer for you, that's going to speak a language that is going to be resonant and be useful, then that's the whole goal, I think, is to have more compassion for yourself and for both your, the parts of you that are in flow and you enjoy, and especially the parts that are in more conflict and that are, more edgy and hard to accept. Like, really, really important to love all parts of self. And we're it's like, that's the one thing about astrology too, is that it becomes very compartmentalized. And I mean, sure it is, when you look at a chart and there's, lines and things are in different places, but everything's connected at the center. It's a circle. Everything's inside of it. So there's a holism there that I think is really important. And so nothing's outside of the circle. And so you have to learn how to accept and integrate all of the bits, even the ones that are less attractive, more challenging.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just talking about that earlier, about like the process of alchemy and, holding this container, and about how life can oftentimes give us many different ingredients, everything from like joy to grief to pain to happiness and it's really truly amazing to me the variety of things that we can hold all at once in that same container, and that how some of them will, it's like the alchemist adding fire or steam or metals or different ingredients, and then sealing up the container and seeing what happens. It reminds me of that, the visual you just gave of having all these different elements and stars in your body and planets in your body and all these energetic influences. And we just hold that. Like our job is to just kind of hold on to that.
It is alchemy. It absolutely is alchemy. And it evolves over time. The natal chart isn't static. There's the progressed chart, which we're not even going to, go into detail about, but like there's this innate wiring, and then how does time and circumstance interact with that, along with your free will and your personality. Like, so it is total alchemy. There's so many moving pieces, and it's about integration, right? Transformation.
Now you're teasing us about the progress
chart.
You've got to talk about
it. Okay, so the progress chart. So the day you're born, the time you're born, your natal chart is like a snapshot of the cosmos, like still a photograph, okay? Mm-hmm. But after somebody took that picture, everything kept moving. And things keep, with hour later, the moon is in another place, and the next day the moon might be in another sign. So things are progressing. Mm-hmm. And in the progress chart, 1 day of your life equals 1 year of your life. So what the planets were doing on the 7th day of your life, that's influential on the 7th year of your life.
Wow.
Yeah. And so big things in progression are when your sun changes signs by progression, your moon, moon will change signs every 2 or 2.5 years. And that's your whole personal lunation cycle. And that's really fascinating to tune into. And personal planets and angles, So it's this way that you unfold, and the chart unfolds. And there's that wiring, there's that nature and nurture maybe, and how you're nurtured by the environment, or how you nurture your own development with that progress chart. And so, yeah, nothing's really static. We're working with time, and time is multidimensional, right? So.
Wow. So if you wanted to know what might be the themes of what be occurring in someone's 60th birthday year, you would be looking at 2 months from your birthday.
I would pull out my handy ephemeris here, the astrologer's tool, and I would look back to that year they were born. Yeah. And then I would look at the day that was 60 days, and I would look at all the astrology, and I would get an understanding of what the planets are doing. You can just cast a chart called the secondary progression chart, but it's fascinating. It's a whole nother layer of astrology that, again, it gets really personal and really nuanced, then it's like an Aries sun is not an Aries sun. Like, what degree, and when did it progress, and what house, and what relationship is it making to other planets? So, yeah.
So complex,
and can get very confusing, convoluted, and complicated. There's a lot of nuance. And so I really strive to try to bring clarity and usefulness, when I talk astrology and when I'm sharing with people and reading charts and my lunar astrology reports, the audios that I make. Like, I'm really trying to distill information that is incredibly multi-layered so that it makes sense. Because there's so much astrological psychobabble that I can understand, but it's like too confusing.
Yeah, I should recommend that if anyone is interested in hearing, they're fantastic. The lunar reports that Kristina does, you can find them either on her website or on Instagram. She'll post up when the latest one is, and you can find the link in her bio for the audio transmissions of the lunar reports. They're so fun, and I love them so much.
I'm glad you love them. I love doing them. It's been a year now, steady lunar astrology reports. So it's been fun. And it's so fun when people just send me a little email or on an Instagram, just like, thank you. That was really helpful. You know, I want to be of service. I want it to help. I don't want to just sit here and twiddle my thumbs and like look at things and talk about them because they're cool. It's really important to me to be helping people understand themselves and the times and the energy. I'm very energy sensitive. And I think that's why, you know, I feel things. I always have, and putting language to it, this is astrological language, is useful for myself and for helping other people understand kind of the energy that's happening.
Yeah, and that really comes through. And that's one of the things that I love most about you and your reports is that you're just so authentic and human, and you walk your talk. You know, you move through the intensities, you live through it, you go through it. You don't avoid things. You know, you're there doing your lunar report with bronchitis and coughing and just like
sucking on cough drops. I try to make the sound quality good. Yeah, I can't not do it. Yeah, it's important to me to keep to the pattern of it. Yeah.
Right, because things are always changing and people are always looking to you. I mean, I find that so fascinating that so many of the astrological or astrologers, you know, that people are like following, you know, new moon comes, full moon comes, and it's like you go to their
peeps.
Yeah,
for sure. It's cool to be a peep. I mean, it's cool to be like some people's astro person. That's, you know, it's really quite an honor. I feel very like, wow, kind of, you know, oh, thanks. Because again, I have no 12th house sun. I'm like, oh, God, look at me, but don't. I need to hide now. So coming out and using my voice and sharing, it's very revealing, and I'm really honored to be helpful.
And speaking of being seen, what's the best way that people can get a taste of your work?
My website, which is my name, KristinaWingeier.com. And I'm sure you'll spell it in the notes so I don't have to do that. And that's the same Instagram handle where I love Instagram. So those are the best places to find me.
I'll spell it for you. It's Kristina with a K, Kristina, and her last name is spelled WINGEIER.com.
Damn, girl. Nice job. It took me a long time to learn to spell my own last name as a kid. So pretty good.
Oh, thank you so much for being with us, Kristina. Fascinating, as always.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Katie.
Yeah, and I'll just put out there for any of you listening, there is a Flower Lounge event in New York City on February 13th, day before Valentine's Day. We would love to see you. It's going to be epic. It will be the best event we've had yet, with a poet, an intuitive, and a dancer joining us all. I hope you can make it. Hopefully we'll be doing a Flower Lounge in San Francisco soon and roping Kristina into the mix. For now, if you are anywhere near New York on the East Coast or within a flight travel from New York, would love to see you at the Flower Lounge on February 13th. Thanks for joining us on the Flower Lounge. Thank you so much for listening to the Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.